There is good news. Labour Party submitted more than 10,000 copies of Forms EC8A, being copies of their own party agents. This will hopefully put to end the constant question, why didn't Labour Party submit their own political party agents to prove they won? You can see that they submitted three types of documents: the ones that INEC gave them, copies from IREV, and the physical copies, the ones that are referred to as hard copies, plus their own party agent copies. Before we analyze all this, let's update you on happenings at the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. The respondents were supposed to submit their final addresses yesterday, and yes, they did that, but it was done after the close of work. So no party can actually get the certified true copies from the court, so that people can see what they wrote inside, how they replied to the many questions and issues raised by the petitioners. And without seeing what they wrote inside, how they replied, no one can make any analysis. So that will be hopefully on Monday, when work will resume at the court. And on Tuesday, all parties will assemble in the court for the adoption of addresses. After the adoption of addresses, the court will either state the judgment day or they will communicate it after. Yes, when the court adjourns after the adoption of addresses, they will only reconvene to deliver judgment. It is not expected to be more than 2 weeks. They will deliberate on many issues, on all the prayers sought by the petitioners. The petitioners include PDP, Labour Party, and the APM. So it will take quite some time for them to go through all the evidence, all the reliefs one by one, and how they apply and interpret the law. The work of the judges is to interpret the law, but lawyers also help them to form their opinion. They also conduct their own research. If you look at all the final addresses by the petitioners' counsels, you will see that a lot of research went into writing the documents. And a lot of people might be confused how many addresses the respondents have to make. Well, it's very simple. The petitioners, Labour Party, PDP, APM, brought INEC, Tinubu, APC, and Shetima to court. So after the hearing stage, the respondents had to address the court. They had to go through all the issues raised by the petitioners. They had to address them one by one. All the arguments they raised against what the petitioners said are contained in their first final address. And after that final address, the petitioners now have the right to reply to all the issues they themselves have raised. So after the petitioners have countered the respondents will now have a final opportunity to respond to their counter, which was exactly what they did yesterday. They submitted their final address. That's the final response to what the petitioners countered. Yes, and at this stage, it stops. The court will now take it from there. They will look at all the issues raised by all the parties to find out who has the superior argument based on the points of law. They will now enter into serious deliberations, to determine all the questions, all the reliefs sought by the petitioners, to see their merits based on law and the evidence before them. Now, let's look at the impact of the more than 10,000 copies of Forms EC8A that Labour Party tendered in evidence, alongside the more than 18,000 copies from IREV that are blurred that INEC stamped and certified and gave them. INEC should have replaced those blurred copies with the hard copies that they claim to have used in collating the results. But they didn't, despite some of these results being blank, as in plain sheet of paper. They just stamped all of them. But Labour Party actually turned their strategy around to their own advantage. The reason INEC withheld evidence is simple. They don't want to bring the evidence that will prove that they did the wrong thing in court. This is why if you read their final reply, you will see that they are arguing that Labour Party failed to prove they won the election, that they believe that the plea has been abandoned by Labour Party. So their strategy was withhold evidence, starve the petitioners the evidence that they need to prove their case, and tell the court, oh, they failed to prove they won. But it backfired seriously, because Labour Party now told the court, since uploaded results on IREV are the same thing with hard copies, then whatever INEC certified and brought to court should be taken as the real thing. Yes, even their witness accepted it under cross-examination. So Labour Party turned their strategy around to their own favor. If the court agrees that truly, yes, they are the same copies, so if you submitted blank copies and blood copies, that means the results can't stand because no one can collate any result without seeing the figures. Now, back to how we discovered this massive evidence tendered by Labour Party in court. INEC, in one of the objections that they made about the admissibility of some of the documents tendered by the Labour Party, while going through the objections, they made these objections while making their final address. In paragraph 2.05, they said, as earlier stated, the exhibits in question, that is, purported certified copies of Forms EC8As, EC8Bs, EC8C, EC8Ds, and EC40Gs issued to the petitioner's respective agents, both from the polling unit level, ward level, local government level, and state level, were all tendered from the bar. We submit that there is no evidence on record that those documents were made by those through whom they were tendered before this honorable court. So in essence, they are just fishing for technicality. They are telling the court that since the Labour Party did not call those party agents or the polling officers who wrote the results or the collation officers who wrote them and gave the Labour Party agents their own copies, that they should be the ones to speak to the documents in court in evidence. Yes, it's quite laughable. They couldn't defend anything. They couldn't counter the results that Labour Party submitted. They couldn't even replace the blood copies. In some cases, they were just blank copies, empty sheets. So, since they failed to counter any of the results, the court will definitely make their decision based on the results before them. And they are thinking that, hey, since we didn't submit, the court will say, you failed to prove. The entire proof is before the court. So in essence, on Labour Party's side, what they did was to provide majority of the results that are hidden in the more than 18,000 blood copies. So based on average vote in this presidential election per polling unit, it's about 140 to 150 votes. So let's just make it a flat figure. About 10,000, let's assume that Labour Party got 100 per polling unit. That's already more than 1 million votes that were hidden by INEC. So despite the fact that the petitioners have proved non-compliance by INEC in a substantial way, the court might also look at the fact that Labour Party actually won the election. That the reason INEC blocked upload of result sheets on election day was because they wanted to block the votes of Labour Party. So you can see the reason why they provided their own copies is to prove to the court that INEC didn't even use hard copies to collate the results. So if the law says upload results to IREF for comparison at different collation levels, and you fail to do that, and you come to court and say it was a glitch that prevented you from following the law, that despite not following the law, that it didn't affect the results because you used hard copies, and with the evidence before the court, you didn't collate the results with the hard copies because they don't tally. So in this instance, what will the court do? They will simply work with the evidence before them. Assuming they decide not to cancel the election despite seeing that there was substantial non-compliance by INEC. Yes, the non-compliance affected the outcome of the election. We are talking about up to 20 million votes unaccounted for by INEC. Upon all the people that came out to register for their PVC, upon the massive crowds that came out on election day to vote, they still could not account for more than 20 million votes. The people voted. It's not that they didn't vote. The evidence is there that they voted, but INEC cannot account for them. They didn't bring evidence. They just brought blood results. Assuming many of these places that are blood are the strongholds of Labour Party. Sometimes when you see results from strongholds of Labour Party, it will seem as if the other parties are not even in the race. Sometimes you see Labour Party scoring 600, while the second party will be about 10 or 20. These number of votes, although they didn't release them, might be up to 2 or 3 million for the Labour Party alone. So we don't know. Also, the respondents don't have them because definitely when they are tendering this evidence, they will just serve them the summary before tendering so that they will know what they are tendering in court. So the respondents don't have the numbers. If they had, One of them must have mentioned it in one of their replies. That's sure. So if the court decides not to cancel the election because of the cost implication of conducting a fresh election, they will simply work with all the evidence before them. None of the respondents countered any evidence tendered by the petitioners. Yes, it's surprising. Imagine arguing that the passport has expired. So for that reason, that the citizenship has also expired. Imagine that kind of argument. So just like they didn't even argue anything about the forged certificate. No counter, nothing like, hey, no, that's not real. That's not his. He didn't submit this. Nothing like that. Someone accused you of forging a certificate. You have nothing to say except submit school records. It is completely irrelevant. So they failed to counter anything. Even the forfeiture, they kept arguing that it was a civil forfeiture. Meanwhile, the petitioners didn't say that it was a criminal forfeiture. They were saying that truly it's a civil, but based on money laundering and narcotics trafficking. So it will take a miracle for them to escape this. All the evidence tendered by the petitioners, none of them, they didn't counter any one of them. Many people don't understand what is going on. You see, the disqualification of Tinubu is no longer a matter of if, it is a matter of when. Yes, it is that solid. The evidence is overwhelming, none was countered, and the judges must form their opinion based on what is before them. They must work with the evidence. They must calculate the figures that Labour Party submitted, that INEC hid in the blood copies. They must add everything together. Of course, they must have done the work for them so that they can now say, yes, this is the person that actually came first. We are adding all the figures together. They hid them. They did that. So the judgment day definitely will be celebration all over Nigeria. Thanks for watching.